Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment of Business Break. Today, we're going to be discussing what you need to know when you're using electronic signatures on contracts and other documents in your business. So the purpose of our presentation today is to provide you with a general overview of the law regarding electronic signatures. And in particular, we're going to discuss when electronic signatures can be used on contracts and documents, the requirements to create a legally binding signature, and considerations that you might want to think about before using or allowing an electronic signature on your documents. So the first consideration is whether an electronic signature can or cannot be used. Whether an electronic signature will be considered to be legally binding depends on the type of document that you are signing. In Alberta, the legislation governing electronic signatures is the Electronic Transactions Act. And the general rule set out in that act is that documents can be signed electronically unless there's an enactment or other legal reason that they need to be physically executed. The Electronic Transactions Act sets out in Section 7, sub 1, a number of exceptions for when electronic signatures will not be legally binding. This means that on these types of documents, you will need to use a physical signature. These documents include estate documents like wills and enduring powers of attorney, trust documents, personal directives. It also includes items that or documents that create or transfer interests in land, including any interest in mines or minerals. It includes guarantees and other negotiable instruments. Those, however, are not the only exceptions. There are other documents that will need to be signed originally in a physical copy in order for them to be legally binding. You often can find in other legislation rules about whether a document needs to be signed originally. Some other documents that you'll come across likely in your business that will need to be signed originally: any document that is a land titles document, bills of exchange, and share certificates all need to be signed physically. Affidavits need to be signed before a person, and an original copy is required for the courts. And loan documents, which create a security interest in land or other security, may need to be physically signed. Most documents which are not governed by the legislations or by legislation and are not excluded from the Electronic Transactions Act can be signed electronically. However, no person is required to use an electronic signature on a document without their consent. So it's important that when you are signing a document that you ensure that the parties have consented to signing the document in that electronic form. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This overview, of course, doesn't cover every possible document that you might come across in your business. And if you'd like to sign a document electronically, or if you're asked by another party to sign a document electronically, you're going to need to ensure that that document will be binding in that electronic form. If you're ever uncertain about whether a document can be signed electronically, we are, of course, happy to assist you with that analysis.
So determining whether a document can be signed electronically is not the only issue. The next question is determining how to ensure that electronic signature meets the legal requirements. There are generally two types of signatures: electronic signatures and digital signatures. Electronic signatures are types of electronic information which identify a person, whereas a digital signature involves additional electronic data which connects the person to the document that they're signing. Digital signatures are used with electronic signatures to add an extra layer of security, and I'll show an example of each of those on the next slide. The type of signature required depends on the type of document, the person signing, and the entity providing the document to be signed. The Electronic Transactions Act at Section 1 defines an electronic signature as electronic information that a person collects or adopts in order to sign a record, and that is in, attached, or associated with that record. So if there are no other requirements created by legislation, a document can be signed with only an electronic signature, and no digital signature is required. The Act also creates additional requirements for documents being signed by public bodies. The electronic signature of a public body meets legal requirements only if it meets the information technology standards set out by the minister or the standards set out by the public body itself, depending on the type of public body. Additionally, public bodies must acknowledge receipt of the information or record in accordance with its own acknowledgement rules. Other enactments create more strenuous requirements for electronic signatures for certain documents. For example, the federal electronic signatures legislation, which applies to federally owned government documents, requires a secure electronic signature for certain documents. A secure electronic signature is created by having a digital signature certificate attached to the electronic document. This digital signature identifies the certification authority, the person who signed the document, and also contains the person's public key. The specific requirements for each document will always depend on the circumstances and the type of document. Once again, if you're uncertain whether a particular form of electronic signature meets the requirements, we'd be happy to assist you with that determination. So the purpose of this slide is simply to illustrate the difference between electronic and digital signatures. As you can see, the electronic signature on the left is simply a piece of identifying electronic information created by the individual signing the document. Alternatively, if you look to the right, this is a digital signature which associates with electronic data connecting a user to the document they're signing. It may record information such as the date the document was signed, the location, the electronic data of the user signed into the account, and whether the user has clicked any necessary consents and acknowledgements prior to affixing the electronic signature. As mentioned above, the two most important considerations are whether electronic signatures will be binding and ensuring the legal requirements for an electronic signature can be met. There are other considerations before accepting or giving an electronic signature as well. One of these is the level of reliability and security of that electronic signature. So regardless of the legal requirements, you should consider what level of security you're comfortable with. This might depend on the situation. For example, you might be comfortable with a simple electronic signature on a letter, but you would likely want a more secure electronic signature with a digital signature component in order to sign a legally binding contract. Always signing with a secure electronic signature is best practice, but realistically, this isn't practical, and every situation should be considered separately. Another consideration to look at is whether you've received the consent from an individual to create an electronic signature. The Act allows a person's consent to be implied by their conduct, and in most cases, this likely will not be an issue. However, the best practice is always to include in the document, for example, a provision stating that the parties have consented to the document being signed in electronic form. This will prevent future issues from arising regarding the creation of the contract. Finally, it's important to ensure the other requirements in the Act and other enactments are met for electronic documents. In this presentation, Tamara and I have focused on electronic signatures, but of course, there are other requirements related to electronic documents. And once again, for each document, it's always important to ensure that it's created in the legally binding manner, particularly when you're using an electronic signature. So we'd be happy to assist with that if you have any questions. Thank you very much for watching this segment of Business Break. If your business has any questions about electronic signatures, please feel free to contact Tamara or I.